You're listening to BQN. Assimilate the audio.
Good morning, I'm Chrissie De Clerck-Szilagyi.
And I'm Jason Szilagyis with today's Caffeinated History with the Szilagyis on the BQN Podcast Collective.
Before we jump into our topic for the day, we'd like to take a moment to thank our BQN Patreon patrons who make our show possible. Listeners, you can hear your name listed here as one of our associate producers for a monthly subscription of just $10 at patreon.com/BQN. And with a monthly Patreon subscription of $5 or more, you can join our Meetings of the Hive Mind. Watch your Patreon messages for details. Today's topic is the Vitruvian Man. The Vitruvian Man is one of the most famous works to come out of the Renaissance. It is a drawing of a nude man who is shown in two different positions, one with arms and legs outstretched at an angle, the other with legs together and arms straight out from the shoulders. His fingertips brush the top edges of a circle and a square, and his feet perch precisely on the bottom of those shapes. It is based on a description of the proportions of the human body by the Roman engineer Marcus Vitruvius Pollio. Vitruvius was a soldier and engineer who served under Caius Julius Caesar in the Gallic Wars and in the Civil War. Little is known about him beyond his own work, De Architectura, on architecture, and some mentions in other people's works. Published in the reign of Augustus and dedicated to the Princeps, De Architectura is the only surviving work on architecture from classical antiquity. Vitruvius wrote that buildings should reflect nature. A bird builds its nest for the same reason a human builds a house. With that in mind, he also considered the conditions of an area in which the building was to be done, with climate and geography at the top of the list of conditions dictating the type of construction and materials used. He also defined three qualities necessary to any building: stability, utility, and beauty. In describing how proportions and symmetry work in nature, Vitruvius described the human body as a perfect example of these elements. In Book 3 of De Architectura, he says, quote, "Just so the parts of temples should correspond with each other and with the whole. The navel is naturally placed in the center of the human body, and, if in a man lying with his face upward and his hands and feet extended, from his navel to the center, a circle be described. It will touch his fingers and toes. It is not alone by a circle that the human body is thus circumscribed, as may be seen by placing it within a square. For measuring from the feet to the crown of the head, and then across to the arms fully extended, we find the latter measure equal to the former, so that the lines at right angles to each other, enclosing the figure, will form a square." It is unlikely that the original included an image alongside the description, but if there was, it was lost over centuries of copying. And so, how exactly the text could be depicted as an image was a mystery that was discussed by philosophers through the Middle Ages, but with no solution found. Some placed the circle inside the square, some the square inside the circle, but neither could be manipulated to match what Vitruvius had described. Until, that is, a man who thought about form and proportion and the connections between nature and the creations of humans in a way that the Roman would have recognized, Leonardo da Vinci. Other attempts to depict Vitruvius's description had all worked from the idea that the center point of both the circle and the square were to be the same, the man's navel. Da Vinci challenged this by placing the center of the circle on the figure's navel, but shifted the center of the square over the figure's genitals. With this slight alteration, the drawing fully matched the description in terms of mathematical proportions and symmetry. The Vitruvian Man is a perfect representation of the Renaissance. Art, philosophy, and science all come together in a single work, inspired by the words of a classical author. Thank you for listening. We'd also like to thank our History with Szilagyis Patreon patrons, Laura Dell, Kris Hill, and Susan Capuzzi-De Clerck, as well as our new patron, Pati. Thank you so much. Their contributions help us to have the time to research and write what you're hearing. You can help us just like they do with a monthly subscription at patreon.com/historywiththeszilagyis. Also, thank you to Mark White for the awesome show art and Zach Tripp for the wonderful closing music. Please subscribe in your favorite podcast player, and don't forget to rate and review us there as well. And while you're at it, check out the rest of the great shows in the BQN Collective. We'd love to hear what you think. If you'd like to reach out, you can find our network on Twitter and Blue Sky at BQN Podcasts, and this podcast in particular on both at History Szilagy. You can also talk about any and all of the BQN podcasts in our Facebook group, the BQN Collective. And last but not least, you can find me on Twitter at the Goddess Livia. That's TheGoddessLivia.
And me at Jason Dark Elf. We'd love to hear topic suggestions. What would you like to learn on Caffeinated History?